It is June 23rd, 2022, and you're watching this report. Big companies are like an iceberg. What you see above the surface is just the tip. There's a lot more going on below. Just look at JP Morgan Chase. They have over 270,000 employees and manage nearly $3 trillion in assets. But what most people don't realize is that they were almost exactly the same size just 20 years ago. And since then, it's only grown about 10% per year. The reason for this slow growth is because big companies, by their very nature, are complex. As a result, they move extremely slowly. And if you're not careful, you can get buried underneath all of the red tape. That's why it takes 6 months to get a new hire onboarded, or why it took 2 years for Netflix to release a password sharing feature, even though every single one of their customers wanted it. Or how back in 2018, it took over 1.5 years for Facebook to respond to reports of Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. Now, I was reading an article the other day that said lean manufacturing is dead. And while I think the concept of lean is still very much alive and well, I do think the author made a valid point. Lean is not enough by itself to keep growing, especially in today's environment. In fact, if you've watched my previous videos, you know that I'm a huge fan of lean. It's a great framework to cut waste and become more efficient. But on its own, it doesn't go far enough. What I want to share with you today is a different lens to look through when it comes to scaling up beyond $100 million. Now, this advice will also apply if you're working inside a large organization. So whether you're running your own business or you want to climb the corporate ladder, this idea could be a game changer. Let's start with a story. Back in 2014, a young lady named Samantha Ramsdell graduated from the University of Michigan with a degree in nursing. Alright, so let's rewind a bit. Back in 2018, while she was working at Bain, Samantha noticed that mid-sized companies were struggling to transition to value-based care. She wrote a white paper outlining her approach and sent it to 25 of her favorite healthcare executives. A few of them ended up hiring her, and word of mouth began to spread. And eventually, some of her clients referred her to other companies. And before long, Samantha had developed a loyal following and was starting to build a personal brand for herself. While none of this was explicitly encouraged by her employer, it was kind of done behind the scenes. But as a result of her efforts, she was able to help Bain land a Fortune 50 client, which is something that typically only the senior partners were allowed to do. And this ultimately led to her promotion, but then COVID hit and everything changed. All of a sudden, every single company in America was trying to figure out how to transition to value-based care. And as a result, she became extremely busy. At this point, it made sense for her to leave Bain and start her own shop, which she did. But even after launching her consulting firm, she continued to build her personal brand by writing articles, speaking at conferences, recording podcasts, and posting on social media. And all of this has led her to where she is today. Not only does she run her own successful consulting firm, but she's also the coup of a publicly traded company. And the lesson here is that having a personal brand and building your network is a superpower that almost no one is taking advantage of. When it comes to advancing your career, there's 2 primary ways to increase your influence. The first is by climbing the corporate ladder and getting promoted. The second is by starting your own thing and building your personal brand. In fact, I would argue that you need both to truly be successful. You need the credibility and connections that come with a traditional job, and you also need the visibility and autonomy that comes with having your own side hustle. The problem with lean is that it doesn't really teach you how to do either of those things. Lean is focused on efficiency. And while that's important, it's not nearly as important as effectiveness. Because lean is only one piece of the puzzle when it comes to building a billion-dollar business. In order to do that, you need to take a much broader lens. And honestly, it all starts with understanding your industry. The thing is, most people don't spend enough time thinking about this. They just focus on building products and generating revenue. But if you really want to take your business to the next level, you need to understand the industry that you're competing in. Take the luxury car market, for example. Everyone thinks it's all about money and status, but that's not actually true. If you look deeper, you'll find that there's a third underlying factor at play, which is exclusivity. For example, there's only one way to get a Tesla Model S Plaid. You have to place an order and then wait in line for several months. Similarly, you can't just walk into a Lamborghini dealership and buy the latest model. You need to put down a deposit and then wait for your turn. Even the perception of exclusivity increases the perceived value of the product. That's why 90% of Ferrari buyers are already millionaires and 3% are billionaires. So when Lexus came along and started mass producing affordable luxury cars, they were basically killing the golden goose. Suddenly, the entire market became commoditized and profit margins dropped across the board. And this is why some industries are naturally more profitable than others. Some industries have higher barriers to entry, which means less competition. Less competition means higher prices, which means higher profit margins. So if you want to scale your business beyond $100 million, it's crucial that you find a highly profitable industry that's not yet been commoditized. In fact, you want to find an industry that is dominated by small mom-and-pop shops who have been complacent for many years and haven't yet been disrupted by large corporations. Think plumbing or landscaping. Those industries tend to be very profitable, but they're also very labor-intensive and difficult to scale. That's why you should always look for industries that are high margin but easy to automate. Industries like software, for example. The next piece of the puzzle is focusing on cash flow rather than profit. Most businesses make the mistake of trying to maximize profits. But if you really want to grow, you need to focus on cash flow. Here's the thing, profits are reported on the income statement, but they're not actually real until you collect the cash. Let me explain. Say that you own a pizza restaurant and you sell a bunch of gift cards during the holidays. You recognize the revenue on your income statement, but you don't actually collect any cash. The same thing happens when you offer discounts or when you invoice a customer, but they don't pay yet. In all of these cases, you would record the revenue, but you wouldn't collect any cash. On the other hand, cash flow is the actual amount of cash coming into and out of your business. And this is the metric that you need to focus on if you want to grow. For example, let's say you run a lawn mowing business and you have two options in front of you. Option 1 pays you $1,000 per month in cash, but it requires you to mow 4 lawns per week. While option 2 pays you $2,000 per month, but it requires you to mow 8 lawns per week. At first glance, you might pick option 2 because the customer is paying you twice as much. But you need to dig a little bit deeper and consider the opportunity cost. Every time you mow a lawn, you're giving up the opportunity to do something else. Maybe you could be investing your time in building your personal brand and growing your network. After all, that's what Samantha did when she was working at Johnson & Johnson. And here's the thing, if you really want to take your business to the next level, you need to be willing to give up some of your time and trade it for money later on. That way you can focus on growing the business without sacrificing too much. Once you figure out how to do that, you can follow the playbook from the video that I did on 7 to 11 and apply the principles of lean manufacturing to become as efficient as possible. But at the end of the day, lean is just one piece of the puzzle. If you want to build $1 billion business, you need to focus on 3 major pieces. First, you need to find a highly profitable industry that's not yet been commoditized. Second, you need to focus on cash flow rather than profit. And finally, you need to focus on effectiveness rather than efficiency. It's counterintuitive, but by focusing on effectiveness, you'll be able to reach a much larger audience without having to sacrifice your values. By the way, The biggest names in the world use this strategy. For example, Coca-Cola has managed to stay relevant for 100 years by sticking to their core competency of creating addictive beverages that bring people happiness. Likewise, Apple has managed to build the world's largest corporation by sticking to their core competency of designing user-friendly technology. Alright, now this next video is one that I did on 7 to 11. It's a step-by-step guide on how to grow your business. Check it out. Here's one of the strategies that they use to grow to $50 billion in revenue.